in 1844 was a great disappointment. Not just for the Adventist church, because the Adventist church hadn't been started yet. But Pastor Miller, did his due diligence, if you will, and found out in the scriptures that the Lord was going to come back October 1844. And in his presentation, he convinced, I don't know if convince is the right word, but he persuaded as many as 1,000 people to meet him to see the Lord coming the second time. And a lot of these people, 1,000 in number, sold everything they had. They gave everything away because they knew they didn't need it, because Jesus was coming again. That day they went out to the rock. They stood there. I can only imagine that they sang hymns. They encouraged one another as the clock continued to tick by. At the end of the day, Jesus didn't come. At the end of the day, there was 1,000 people very, very disappointed that Jesus didn't come. But out of that situation, the Adventist church was born. The group that met on the rock, they called themselves Advent, because it was the Advent. But the Seventh-day Adventist church was born out of that disappointment. And I want to share with you that I believe that there are Adventists in every denomination. If you are looking for the Son of God to return, you are an Adventist. You may have a different name before it. But Mrs. White wrote that disappointment was nothing compared to the disappointment of the disciples. They wanted the Messiah. They wanted a king. They wanted Jesus to fulfill that. They looked forward to Jesus doing that. And I can only imagine that among themselves they talked about when Jesus would become king. As we know and as we've read and studied that night, that Thursday night, when Jesus was arrested, he didn't put up a fight. He allowed them to tie his hands together. He did a miracle which just would convince me, if I was in that mob, that this was truly the man that he said he was, the Son of God, taking a man's ear and putting it back on. The disciples watched from a distance. They listened to the trials that went on that night. The next morning, Friday morning, they watched Jesus, who had been beaten, who had been treated so poorly, try to carry his cross. Some were off in a distance, some were up close. John was there with his mother. And then when the time came that they nailed Jesus to the cross, the disappointment that the disciples felt. I can't even imagine that kind of disappointment. The disappointment that was just gyrating through their body. They were just, every emotion. This is Jesus, the one that was going to be King of Kings, Lord of Lords. This is he. He's going to set up an earthly kingdom. But he's dying. True disappointment. You know, each one of us have faced disappointment. Some of you face disappointment every day. But I think one of the hardest disappointments for us to deal with right now, 2019, is when an ice cream scoop falls off the cone. That is truly disappointment. Because there it is, laying on the ground, and we can't do anything about it. Well, some of you might look around to make sure no one is looking. Pick it up and wipe off the bottom and put it back on the cone. Now, that's just some of you. But we all face disappointments of some kind or another. If it might be a bad marriage, it might be a job that just isn't going anywhere. You've worked at the same job for so many years and you go, by now I should be the vice president in charge of nothing. But no, I sit at my desk every day and I do the same thing every day. It could be disappointment in your children. They just didn't turn out the way I thought they should be. I've told you before, but when our son, cute little guy, I always thought he should grow up and be a pastor. I just thought that should be his calling. Well, one day the garbage truck was out in front of the house, and it just, for some reason, it would pick up the garbage, and then the truck would just rattle and shake and make all kinds of noise. And our son, he just thought that was the coolest thing. And for some reason, he knew which day was garbage day, and he would sit on the front porch and watch them. And he came in and said, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be a garbage truck driver." And my hopes of him being a pastor just kind of disappeared. Disappointment. We all face it. We all deal with it. But I want you to follow with me in a story in the Bible in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy 32, verse 48 and on. If you have your electronic device, I hope you're looking it up and you're not playing a game. Deuteronomy 32, 48 and on. That same day the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Moab, to the mountains east of the river, and climb Mount Nebo, which is across from Jericho. Look out across the land of Canaan, the land I am giving the people of Israel as their own special possession. Then you will die there on the mountain. You will join your ancestors just as Aaron and your brother died on Mount Hor and joined his ancestors. For both of you betrayed me with Israelites at the waters of Meribah and Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. You failed to demonstrate my holiness to the people of Israel there, so you will see the land from a distance, but you may not enter the land I am giving to the people of Israel." I don't know about you, but I get a picture that Moses went up on the mountain, and as he's looking across the valley, and he sees the promised land, something that was in his vision for 39 years. At this point, it was almost the end of 40. And God says to him, "Go up on the mountain because you're going to die." I can only imagine the disappointment that Moses felt. Him standing there and he's saying, if I, could I, should I, if I could have, should have. We say it all the time. If I just had obeyed God, I would be able to go into Canaan and eat some of those grapes that is as large as a watermelon. Our watermelons. I would be able to enjoy the fruits of my labor. Disappointment. I just kind of feel it. But when we read the story of Moses, we don't read disappointment in the Bible. We don't read that he was disappointed. We read that, further in Deuteronomy, it says that he died with perfect eyesight and strength. He didn't go up there a sickly man. He went up there because God told him he was going to go up there. You can see Canaan. It's just right over there, but you can't go. You're stopping right here. Disappointment. When we think about disappointment, at least when I think about disappointment, get a definition. The definition that I like best out of every one of them that I looked at is says that disappointment is the failure of getting what you in. I lost it. It's called old age. Disappointment is the failure in getting what you anticipated. There we go. Thank you. You anticipate all kinds of things, and you're disappointed when it doesn't happen. Oh, just not too long ago, Carol made a pie. Oh, it was good. It was delicious, but she was disappointed because the crust didn't turn out just right. I'll tell you something, it didn't taste any different. It was good. Disappointment. We all face it. An author wrote this quote, and I can't tell you who it is because at the end of the quote it says unknown. The author that wrote this said, "Don't let today's disappointments take away from tomorrow's happiness." I like it. Disappointment. How do we deal with disappointment? Well, we deal with it in several different ways. And first of all, we have to understand, where did this disappointment come from? What caused this disappointment in my life? Then we have to take ownership of disappointment without it taking ownership of us. Because if we sit back and just allow disappointment just to eat us alive, we will be unhappy people. We won't move forward. We will constantly relive the situation, the disappointment. The disappointment of not getting that job you really wanted. Oh, I really wanted that job. That would have been such a cool job, and I was qualified for it, but they didn't hire me. So you go through life and you go from one job to the next job because you're living with the disappointment of not getting that dream job. So that leads us to the next point of disappointment. We don't allow it to control us. You don't. Because if you do, your life will be, well, there's several things that will happen to you. One will be depression, anxiety, the want to do nothing. Why should I even try? Because it doesn't work out for me. I'm just going to get by. Just get by. When I was in the second grade, and some of you know this already, when I was in the second grade, I used to run home for lunch. We lived close enough that I could do that. It was better than eating food from the school cafeteria. And I would run home to eat lunch, and when I would get there, my nose would start bleeding. And so I would miss the rest of the day of school. I would be laying on the couch, the sofa, with my head propped up with an ice pack on it and staying home. Well, at the end of the second grade, we got our report cards. And mine said, "You'll be in the second grade again next year." Now that's really disappointing. That's discouraging. That's just downright not right. But you'll be in the second grade the next year. The town that we grew up in, everybody knew everybody. You remember those days. You never locked your doors. You left the keys in the car, and everybody knew everybody. It didn't take long for all of the second graders that I went to school with to realize that I was not going to the third grade with them. I was going to be kept behind. those same kids that I went to school with, I also went to church with on Sabbath. You know what they did? Kids are mean. They said only dummies flunk the second grade. Well, it must be true. I flunked the second grade, and well, if that's the truth, that only dummies flunk the second grade, then why try? Why try? Do you know you can become something with a D? Not much, but you can become something. They will pass you on to the next grade if you've got a D point, you know. But if you've got total Fs, they're not going to. And it didn't take me long to realize that I did not have to try in school. Because of the disappointment in the second grade, I did not apply myself in school. Didn't have to. There's no expectations from anyone. Just dummies flunk the second grade. And I'm so thankful that when I became a junior in high school, I had an English teacher who loved to teach. She taught English, but she just loved to teach. And she encouraged all of her students to learn how to do that sentence diagramming thing. You remember the lines. It was fun. I enjoyed that. She encouraged us to do better in school. I remember one time the guys in the back row, I always sat up front because that's where they wanted me to sit, so they keep an eye on me. But the guys that sat in the back row, they were cursing. And she stopped her class and she said, you know, there's a proper word for everything. Only dummies use that kind of language. And I'm going, Now I got a new standard of dummies. But she encouraged us to study, and it was really cool how that one teacher opened up a whole new realm of learning. Several years later after that, we invited a pastor and his wife over for our house for Sabbath lunch. And I was building homes at the time. And he said, you know, you must be a really smart guy. I said, no, I'm not. He said, no, really, you must be a pretty smart guy because you work with numbers all day long. You're figuring out angles and you're figuring out slopes, you're figuring out all kinds of things. You must really be pretty smart. No, I'm not smart at all. I'm just a dummy. That's what they told me in the second grade. I'm just a dummy. And that afternoon, not Saturday afternoon, but that week, I went to the office of the guy that did the excavating for the projects that we were doing, and his wife was there, and his wife was my second grade teacher. This was a long time later, right? And I said to her, I said, Mrs. Page, do you remember me in the second grade? And she says, yeah, I remember. I said, do you remember why you kept me back? She says, yes, I remember. Well, that impressed me. She said, it wasn't because you weren't doing your schoolwork. It was because you missed too much time. Too many days. You missed too many days. Wouldn't it have been cool if somebody would have told me in the third grade that that's why I was left behind? Disappointment. How do you deal with it? Well, for me in that sort of situation, I dealt with it not trying. I dealt with it, I could get by just by doing the minimum. I understand you cannot be a doctor by passing with D's. You have to have a little better than that. But that's one of my first questions I ask a new doctor. Are you like a D average student? Because really, if he is, I want to move on to a different doctor. But it would have been neat if somebody would have told me in the third grade that, and I wouldn't have grown up with all the disappointment that I dealt with all my life. Why try? Why try? And that just didn't apply in school. That applied in everything. Everything. We grew up in the Northwest. And in the Pacific Northwest, school children at that time were permitted to go out and pick strawberries and get paid for it. Blackberries, boysenberries, green beans. Then we moved to filberts, and then we moved to walnuts. So we started working the day school was out in June, and we worked up almost to Halloween in October. And we made our own money. Well, my attitude was, why try? I was living under that cloud of disappointment all my life until I found out why. And then I could have, oh man, I can apply things. The Bible says that Moses went up on the mountain and he died there. But I don't think he died with disappointment. He was sorry for what he had done, but it didn't control his life. It didn't identify him. He was a great leader. And when he died, the people mourned his death as a great leader. Even though they picked on him, I would never have wanted to be Moses. Not at all. But Moses saw the vision, saw the dream, saw the promised land. You know, we are at the close of 2019. Who would have figured we would be here that long? But we're about ready to open the door on 2020. 2020, you know, we should be like the Jetsons. Now, did I just give my age away? You remember the cartoon, the Jetsons? We should be hovering around in hovercrafts, but yes, we do have telephones or wristwatches that we can talk to. Yep, we do. We are moving ahead. We're at that threshold of 2020. If you are dealing with depression or disappointment, if you're dealing with disappointment today because of things that didn't accomplish this year, just know that God, He loves you. There are over 25 texts in the Bible telling us how to deal with disappointment. But the best one of all, the paraphrase, says, put your hand in the hand of the man. Because he will lead you. He will guide you. He will get you through your disappointment, whether it be a bad marriage, a bad job, or bad children. He will get you past that. Even if it's a disappointment that you weren't able this year to lose that 30 pounds that you thought you could, or 40. You couldn't do it. That could be a disappointing thing for some people. Maybe it's the disappointment that you didn't get a raise. Maybe it's just a disappointment that you're not living where you think you should be living. At Thanksgiving time, our community had a Thanksgiving dinner, and one of the couples showed us pictures of their vacation. Don't you just love it? Hey, look where I went. Showed them. They went back and they went to the Biltmore Mansion. Huge. Huge. Gigantic. Lots of beautiful tapestries. Lots, just splendor everywhere. I'm going to tell you right now, I would not want to live in a place like that. Carol tells me no way, she doesn't want to clean it. Bigger the house, the more cleaning. And I don't blame her because, when I want to go somewhere, I want to say, Carol, let's go. And I don't want to hear, I've got to vacuum first. Or the dishes need to be done. Or the bed needs to be made. I want to hear, yes, dear, let me get my jacket. Let's go. So a big house like that would not be a disappointment for me. But for some of you, you might think, well, where I live is not really what I want. I'm really disappointed in that. There's all kinds of things that we allow disappointment to get at us. It's not just a single scoop of chocolate peppermint ice cream falling to the ground. That's just kind of trivial, but it does happen. It's not the disappointment. It's how we deal with the disappointment that counts. How we look at it. Do we allow it to take ownership of us? Or do we take ownership of it and move on? And move on. In my mind, I had to figure out, when did Moses strike the rock that God told him to speak to? What point in that great Exodus did that happen? In the second grade, if I would have had a computer, I would have excelled and went to the third grade. Because in the age of internet and things are out there, I was able to pull up a timeline that several people have put together, and they say that in 1407 BC is when Moses struck the rock. And Moses went up on the hill, went up on the mountain to look at Canaan and die in 1406. He had to deal with disobeying God for a year. He had to think about it. And I think in that year he came to a conclusion that God loved him. And God forgave him, but God told him he would not see the promised land. There are things that we do in our lives that may hold us back from seeing the promised land. Things that may keep us from going that way. But I tell you right now that if you put your faith in Jesus, who died on the cross so that you can see the promised land, and you confess your sins, that you will see it. And you don't have to beat yourself up for the disappointments that you experience. So let me say to you, Happy New Year. And I hope you live a very prosperous, a very guilt-free life, and live without disappointment. Pray with me. Father God, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the stories in the Bible. I want to thank you that Moses, being the leader that he was, stepped up and took responsibility and went up on the mountain to die as you told him. I want to thank you for that story, and I want to thank you that we don't read anywhere in the story about disappointment in Moses' life. Because that tells me that we can live a life without disappointment. The next time the cone falls off, or the ice cream falls off the cone, Father, give us the ability to say, oh well, things happen. Thank you again for your son Jesus, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen.